Welcome to the 2019 lecture series here at the University of Texas at Austin School of Architecture. For more information about the school, their programs, their landscape program, architecture program, all the programs, visit soa.utexas.edu for more information. Today we have Adam Greenspan of PWP Landscape Architecture firm from Berkeley. Thank you for taking the time to sit down with us. How are you doing today? Good?
Good. So far, so good.
Good. So I want to get started with, I talked with Juliana Wolf from Studio Gang, and we were talking about, she was talking about designing for the Chicago skyline and how personally the people of Chicago value the skyline. And we were talking about how do you design for that. And your firm, PWP, was in charge of the landscape for the 9/11 Memorial, which I think is not just something the city of New York really values, but I think the country as a whole, it's a very important moment in time. So can you take us through, as a firm, how do you go about, because you have to make sure you get it right, I'm assuming, how do you go about that design process?
Well, I think it's something we focus on for all of our work. For the 9/11 Memorial, it was a very involved process, and there were a lot of meetings and sort of special time taken with the people of New York, politicians, families, all different kinds. But I think, what we think is really important is that each place that we make needs to be valued by the places and the cities and the geographies that they're in, and that's how they'll stay around over time. And I think it's something that in order to make something that lasts, and it's important for us to design and construct projects that last through time. People need to feel connected to them, and people need to identify with them. And so we think the design itself, what places feel like, look like, sound like, smell like, need to affect people. And in that way, we hope they end up sort of sitting somewhere special in people's hearts.
And was there a certain sensitivity or anything special within the design process for the 9/11 Memorial that maybe you had to take extra care of?
Well, I think there were many special parts. And my part on the 9/11 Memorial was sort of a niche effort. Mine was focused on the living material in the 9/11 Memorial. So the tree selection, what species of tree and where they came from, was what I personally worked on. We were required to get trees from all of the states that had that the tragedies happened in on 9/11. So the selection of the tree species itself was really important. We wanted to select a resilient species or number of species so that they would grow and live well in an urban setting for a very long time. But we also then had to find sources for those trees in Pennsylvania, in New York, in the Virginia area, all because that's where the planes went down. So that was a very labored process and long. I also worked on micro-planting plans, trying to create literally niches in the stone and paving work so that moss could infiltrate the cracks over time. So what we have is a very hard plaza that's meant to allow as many users to come and experience the space and the plaza over time as they can, but we also have very small cracks and joints in between the pavers so that moss can also come and visit and sort of take hold there.
So before we dive too far into your career, because we have a lot to talk about, but can you just take us through where you grew up, kind of what your family did, what the economics were of your household, and out of all the things you could have done in life, why the heck landscape architecture?
Sure. I grew up in Los Angeles. My parents were from New York. But they moved, and I was born in LA, and I grew up in the Hollywood Hills. So I went hiking and played in the wilderness, even though that wilderness was in the middle of sprawling Los Angeles. That said, I did art as a kid, but what I did more regularly from when I was a young child all the way through was collected animals. And so I caught lizards in the backyard, and I bought lizards and had tortoises and turtles and rabbits and birds. And my parents facilitated that. But at some point they said, no more animals. And so when they said no more animals, I turned to plants. and I made my first garden, which was at their house or my childhood house. And that was how I got into gardening, which became sort of what I did during my high school years. I went to college in a liberal arts college in Connecticut, and I majored in sociology and studio art. So I did installation art and sociology, both disciplines you can really look at whatever subject or whatever concept you want to look at through the medium of sociological investigation or creation, fabrication in art. And so I think those things coming together with my interest in animals and plants, after I graduated college, I sort of did art and worked at a nursery, and then decided there was a way to put it all together, and that was landscape architecture.
So you went to landscape architecture school at University of Pennsylvania. How has the sociology aspect influenced your architecture?
Well, I think that's really going back to what you said in the beginning. How do you take to heart the users or the settings and the environment that the work that we do exists in? And that's the natural environment. Penn was known for an ecological focus in the past. I didn't go there for that reason. But I think ecologically and sociologically, all of the work that we do as designers sits within systems, that are there on any site and in any place before we come there. And so I think being able to talk to people, being able to ask questions, see connections between things, all of those things are ways of looking at the world that was part of a sociological way of thinking about relationships between people or societies. And I think that sort of extends to relationships between systems and natural systems too.
Talking about working between systems, I think in architecture school, there's, I don't want to say it's a hierarchy, and I'm just speaking strictly about the school system, that there's these subdivisions. So there's landscape architecture, there's interior design, and then architecture just kind of like plops all over the top of it. So and I think once you get into the field, these things intermingle a little bit better than they do in school. So how do you think this mixture, how do these things relate, and how could they better relate in the school setting?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the school that I went to, Penn, really did feel that landscape architecture and regional planning at the time was what went over all the other things, at least from that department. Architects probably didn't think that at the time either. But I think coming from the idea that all parts exist, in relation to each other, the goal of landscape architecture and sort of what I was trained to think was that all of those parts come together in a broader idea of landscape than a designed landscape only. And so how could that fit, you think, better in school? I think
I mean, if you disagree that maybe there isn't a divide, I just kind of feel like
I guess
they live in their own silos, I guess.
I think I felt coming out of school that they were more equal and more interrelated than I found the field to be when I went into practice. I saw the lines more sharply drawn in practice than I did in academia. And so I hope that doesn't burst a bubble. No. But I think, what ended up happening for me was understanding that because of things like liability and because of blame or responsibility, as well as the need for different firms to make a profit on the work that they do, defining contracts, along specific scope lines was something that was a big part of the field that wasn't, in my mind related to the concept or the disciplines, when I came out of school. And that's something that I think has been evolving. And I think especially now, so now support what you said. The projects I've been working on lately, which are the Bay Transit Center Park in San Francisco, which is a 5-acre park on top of a transit center that's 4 stories tall and 4 blocks long in downtown San Francisco.
Outside the new Salesforce Tower.
And it was a competition that, a design competition that transit center and the tower, which is now called the Salesforce Tower, were part of the same competition, one competition idea. That's obviously a very integrated project where architects, engineers, environmental engineers, structural engineers, landscape architects all work together with city planning in order to make a totally integrated scheme. And so in that way, it was very, very interrelated. And the park, which at this point is what the residents of San Francisco are in a way most excited to have, even though they get a bus station also, they're excited for the park in this new neighborhood. The park might be the most visible part of that project in a way for daily users because not everyone uses the bus. And so the role that landscape architecture played in that overall team was perhaps more equal because of the identity that the park was giving the project. While it was a very integrated project and probably there was a lot more work and a lot more money put into the architecture than there was the landscape architecture in the end.
Can you take us through, how did you end up at PWP? It's a 30-year firm. It's been around for about 30 years. And how did you end up there? And now you're a partner. What specifically were you doing that kind of allowed you to get noticed and kind of move up throughout the firm?
Well, I ended up there because I interned there my year before I graduated. I had been living in San Francisco before I went to graduate school in Philadelphia, and I sublet my apartment when the first .com boom and bust happened. So I had a cheap place to go back to, but I didn't think I was going to head back there. I thought I'd move. But since I really enjoyed the work that I did when I was an intern, and I knew and felt like there was a group of collaborative people that I'd be working with, and I got a good offer, I thought that was a great place to begin my career in landscape architecture. And I thought I would stay for probably 2 years and start my own firm in somewhere like Los Angeles or New York. But because of what I did while I was there and because of the way that I was involved in projects and the projects continued to grow and I continued to learn on those projects and then also expand within the office, I stayed for longer and longer and longer. And so, you know, specifically what did I do that led to my success there and also to me staying, I think is expanded some of the focus of the office on the projects I was working on initially, but then also a bit broader. So some of the interdisciplinary ideas that we were just talking about were things that I thought were norms because of coming from sociology and coming from University of Pennsylvania. I felt like interrelated goals and ecological goals were part of what landscape architecture was about. So I pushed the practice in some ways towards greater integration with other fields, especially working towards a deeper understanding and use of living systems in our work. But I think really what led to my success in the office was that the projects I was working on turned out well, were well built, came off well as experiences for people visiting them, and also photos and performance over time.
So put us in the room. PWP goes into, they're shortlisted for a project. You go into that final meeting. What is it that makes the client say, that's the firm we're going with?
It's really hard to understand. No, I don't know. I think, what I think you can see is that the work that we show is the work that we've done. It's really important that we work on design and landscape architecture that is realizable in the real world, that gets built and is able to have a life of its own as part of a community, as part of a system. Um, Speculative ideas or master planning ideas that are about the basis for future projects, or provocative as design on paper but not necessarily buildable in the real world, it is not really the kind of work that we do best or that we're focused on. And so I think what we try to do is show how focused on the reality of the moment, of the site, of the culture, of the space, with each of the clients that we hope to work with. And I think it's seeing the results of that kind of focus through accounts of other projects or photographs or videos is probably what convinces people.
What's your proudest moment in architecture?
I think seeing places take on a life of their own is the proudest moment. Being able to go somewhere when it's not, my work or our work, but it's a place that people are really excited by or enlightened by or moved by, I think. And seeing people or animals or plants, end up spending time at the projects that we've designed, and it really, those projects becoming their home, their place, is something that's really touching, and it makes you think about the future and time and how what we do today hopefully will last, hundreds of years into the future, the life of the trees that we plant, when we do them.
Your biggest setback in architecture, and how have you used it to motivate yourself to get to where you are today?
The biggest setback is a lack of understanding in general in the world with landscape architecture. I think architecture is easier for the majority of people to understand, meaning when you have something that's clearly defined, whether it's a design or an object or a building, at least you can be talking to almost anyone about it and they know what it is. When you're talking about designing living systems or designing places, it's hard to know that you're both talking about the same thing. And I think that, what landscape architecture can be understood as is sometimes decoration only, decorating the outside of buildings or decorating a streetscape, when actually landscape architecture can be much more performative, can be doing things for the environment, can be doing things for culture, but can also and should also be something that has the potential and the power to catch people's attention and allow them to see, I think, into the wonder of life. And I think, the biggest setback is trying to get people to spend the time to either be able to understand that when you're talking about something that's yet to be designed, or trying to get those people to spend the time off of their electronics, experiencing the real world, after you've done it. I think that's the most demoralizing thing, is when you feel like you're working with life, which is what's so exciting, I think, about landscape architecture. But it's not clear whether people value life and reality, the reality of life, some days.
What advice would you have for the young kid chasing lizards in his parents' house that wants to have the type of career that you've had?
Advice would be just keep asking questions and try to involve yourself in as many things as you can, because I think with both architecture, landscape architecture, environmental design, really, getting into and understanding aspects of the world help put the puzzle together. And design is putting together, a new puzzle each time. And it's not one that necessarily has rules to it, straight off. But asking many questions and experiencing many things, I think, will lead to the possibility of an interesting career and future in that work.
I have one last question because I know you got to get over to the lecture here at the University of Texas. But what's next for Adam Greenspan and PWP?
Next is this lecture, but next for PWP is evolution. We've been growing and changing over the years. Pete Walker has been working in the field for about 60 years. Like you said, this office has been around for about 35 years. He's involved in the office, but is not leading it in the way. It's led by a group of partners. So what we're doing is bringing the office into its next iteration, which is really a continuation of its beginning, which is focusing on creating places that are memorable, places that are identifiable. But those places are very complex these days. They try to integrate as many people and as many life forms, as many things as possible within a design, while still making it memorable and oftentimes iconic. And so we hope to keep doing that, making places that people cherish in the world.
Well, Adam Greenspan, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me. I hope you enjoyed it. I think our audience will. And thanks a lot, man.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, take care, everybody.